The last thing I expected when we pulled onto that desolate stretch of highway was how the world would twist on its axis. The evening started normal enough. 4 of us, the best friends you could ask for, packed into my ancient sedan and eager to escape the monotony of small-town life. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend. Just a road trip, some music, and miles of open road. The day had been beautiful, clear skies, a warm breeze. But as night descended, the air thickened, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing us whole. There was no moon, no stars, just blackness all around us, broken only by the occasional flicker of the headlights. "Check the GPS," I said to my buddy in the passenger seat, trying to hide my unease. But the GPS wasn't responding. It had been glitching for hours, cutting out completely as soon as we left the last town. "Relax," he said. "We'll hit a gas station soon. Or a diner. Something." But there was nothing. No signs. No markers. Just the empty highway. And that was when we saw it. A lone figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just feet away. My heart was in my throat as I peered through the windshield at the silhouette. A man, dressed in dark clothes, his head tilted unnaturally to one side. "Is he okay?" Someone whispered from the back seat. Before I could answer, the figure moved. Not toward us, no, it was stranger than that. He stepped to the side, almost disappearing into the shadows, his movements jerky and wrong, like he wasn't used to his own limbs. I rolled the window down a crack, adrenaline spiking. "Hey, do you need help?" No response. The figure vanished into the tree line, swallowed by the blackness. "Let's get out of here," someone said urgently, but the car wouldn't start. The headlights dimmed, and the temperature dropped so sharply inside the car that I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The smell hit next, coppery, metallic, wrong. And then, just outside the driver's side window, something scraped against the glass. The sound against the glass wasn't just a random scrape. It was deliberate, slow and measured, like someone was testing the barrier between us. Everyone froze. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat as I turned my head toward the window. There was nothing there. "Drive! Now!" Someone shouted from the back seat, but the car still wouldn't start. I cranked the ignition furiously, each attempt accompanied by a weak cough from the engine and that awful scraping sound. And then the figure reappeared. It wasn't standing anymore. It was crouched low, hands pressed to the asphalt like an animal ready to pounce. The way it moved, its limbs too long, its joints bending in unnatural directions, wasn't human. My fingers fumbled to lock the doors. The figure's head tilted back as if sensing my fear, and for the first time, I saw its face. Except, it didn't have a face. Just smooth, featureless skin stretched where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. My stomach churned as I realized that it was looking at me, or sensing me, somehow without needing eyes at all. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered, their voice trembling. Before anyone could react, the thing darted forward, slamming its hands against the hood of the car. The entire vehicle shuddered under its weight. It moved with impossible speed, dragging itself across the windshield, leaving long, jagged scratches on the glass. Its head tilted again, unnaturally, as if it were studying us. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke, too stunned to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the steering wheel. I turned the key again. This time, mercifully, the engine roared to life. "Go!" Someone screamed, and I didn't need to be told twice. The tires squealed as I floored it, speeding down the highway like my life depended on it. For a few minutes, it seemed like we were in the clear. But then the headlights flickered and the GPS, still useless, lit up on its own. The screen showed no map, no roads, just static, and a single word, flickering in and out like an old neon sign. "Turn around." "Nope, nope, nope," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the road, but the car began to slow on its own, the engine sputtering like it was being choked. The lights dimmed again, and the road ahead was swallowed by darkness. That was when we saw them, shapes emerging from the shadows on both sides of the road. Dozens of them, figures, all with that same faceless, wrong-bodied appearance, stepping onto the highway as if drawn to the car. They didn't run. They didn't need to. They moved in perfect unison, their jerky steps almost mechanical. The car came to a stop, no matter how hard I pressed on the gas. And we were trapped, surrounded. One of them reached the driver's side window, its hand pressing flat against the glass. Its head tilted, the smooth skin where its face should have been inches from my own. And then it spoke. Not with words. The sound was inside my head. A crackling, distorted noise like a radio stuck between stations. But the message was clear. You don't belong here. The sound in my head was unbearable, like shards of static tearing through my thoughts. I clutched the sides of my head, desperate to block it out, but it was inside me. There was no escaping it. You don't belong here. The figures pressed closer, their hands smearing the windows with dark streaks that weren't blood but something thicker, blacker, as if the night itself was oozing from their touch. The car groaned under the weight of their hands, their jerky movements growing more synchronized, more purposeful. One of them climbed onto the hood, its body folding unnaturally as it peered into the windshield. Then the radio crackled to life. No one had touched it, but the dial spun wildly, jumping through stations before settling on a voice. A woman's voice, calm and hollow. "Turn off your headlights," it said. "What?" I gasped, looking at my friends. "Are you crazy?" The radio hissed, and the voice came again, this time more insistent. "Turn off your headlights. Now!" "I'm not doing that," I yelled, gripping the wheel tighter. But as I said it, the headlights flickered on their own, dimming and then surging back to life. The figures recoiled slightly, their bodies twisting as if in pain. "Do it," one of my friends shouted. "Just do it." Reluctantly, I reached for the switch. My heart pounded as the lights clicked off, plunging us into total darkness. The silence was immediate. The figures stopped moving, frozen in place as though someone had hit pause on their grotesque choreography. My breathing slowed, but my relief was short-lived. The car lurched violently, sliding sideways on the asphalt. We screamed as the vehicle tilted, lifted off its wheels, and slammed back down with a bone-rattling crash. The static on the radio grew louder, the woman's voice whispering unintelligibly now, words dissolving into the crackling hiss. And then the road wasn't a road anymore. The asphalt beneath us seemed to ripple, bending and warping like liquid. The figures had disappeared, but the darkness remained, pressing in from all sides. The only light came from the car's interior, casting eerie shadows that danced on the twisted, shifting ground. "Drive!" someone yelled, but the steering wheel was locked, and the gearshift wouldn't budge. We were stuck. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, a shape massive and indistinct, rising out of the blackness. It wasn't like the figures we'd seen before. This thing was something else entirely. Its form was constantly shifting, a swirling mass of limbs and faces, all melding and breaking apart in an endless cycle of grotesque transformation. It moved closer, and I could feel it. Its weight, its presence bearing down on us. The woman's voice returned, clear and sharp over the static. "Do not look at it." Too late. My eyes were locked on the mirror, unable to tear away from the horrifying spectacle. The faces within the thing seemed to turn toward me, their mouths stretching wide in silent screams. My vision blurred, and a sharp pain shot through my skull, as if something was trying to claw its way into my mind. "Close your eyes," the voice demanded. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Around me, I heard my friends sobbing, panicking, but I couldn't open my eyes. I wouldn't. The thing was closer now. I could feel its cold breath on the back of my neck, hear the wet, squelching sound of its body shifting and expanding. "Say it," the voice whispered. "Say what?" I croaked, my voice barely audible. The radio crackled again, and the voice became a chorus, overlapping itself in a distorted harmony. "You don't belong here." I didn't understand, but I repeated the words, my voice trembling. "I don't belong here." The ground beneath the car shifted violently, and I felt a sensation like falling, plummeting through darkness, weightless and disoriented. The chorus grew louder, echoing inside my skull, until it suddenly stopped, and everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the car. I wasn't anywhere. It was like being suspended in an endless void, a place where the laws of reality no longer applied. My friends were there, or at least I thought they were. Their shapes flickered in and out of focus, like reflections on a rippling surface. I tried to move, but there was no ground beneath me, no sense of direction or gravity. Where are we? Someone's voice echoed, distorted and distant. I don't know, I shouted back, but the sound barely felt like my own. It was swallowed almost immediately by the emptiness. Then, out of the darkness, a faint light appeared. It wasn't warm or inviting. It was cold and sharp, cutting through the void like a razor's edge. The light grew brighter, revealing a shape in the distance. A structure. It looked like a road, but it wasn't one I recognized. It stretched out into the nothingness, its surface made of something black and reflective, like obsidian. And on that road, something was waiting for us. A car. Not my car, but an older model, a rusted, boxy sedan with its headlights flickering erratically. The doors creaked open on their own, and the interior lights cast a sickly yellow glow. No way, one of my friends whispered. I'm not getting in that thing. We don't have a choice, I said, though every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. But run where? There was nowhere to go, no escape from this place. We hesitated, but one by one we climbed into the car. The air inside was stifling, heavy with the smell of burnt rubber and something faintly metallic. The dashboard was covered in cracks, the radio knobs missing. But the engine roared to life as soon as we were all inside, the headlights illuminating the black road ahead. The car started moving on its own. No one was driving, but the wheel turned smoothly, guiding us down the impossible stretch of road. The void around us began to shift, shapes forming and dissolving in the darkness. Sometimes I thought I saw faces, familiar ones, their features twisted in pain. Other times, it was just shadows, darting and swirling just beyond the edges of the headlights. I don't like this, someone whispered, their voice trembling. Shut up, another snapped. Just don't say anything. The car picked up speed. The road narrowed, twisting and looping in ways that defied physics. At one point, it felt like we were driving straight up, the engine straining against gravity, though none of us felt like we were moving at all. And then we saw them again. The figures. They lined the road on either side, faceless and motionless, their bodies twitching slightly as the car passed. They didn't try to stop us, they just stood there watching, or whatever the equivalent of watching was for them. But the farther we went, the closer they got, leaning into the road, their hands reaching out toward the car. One of them brushed against the window, leaving a smear of that same black substance. Another slammed its hand on the hood, but the car didn't stop. It only sped up, the engine roaring louder, the headlights flickering violently. Faster! I screamed, though there was no driver to obey. The road suddenly ended. There was no warning, no sign, just an abrupt drop-off into nothingness. The car didn't slow down. It barreled straight off the edge, and for a moment we were weightless, suspended in the void. Then we hit the ground. The impact jolted me awake, or at least it felt like waking. I was back in my car, on the same highway where this nightmare had started. My friends were there, too, all of us gasping for air, trembling with the aftershock of whatever had just happened. The road was empty. The night was quiet, and yet something was wrong. The GPS had reset, displaying the map of our route again, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But the destination had changed. Home. We didn't input it, and when I tried to change it, the screen flickered, locking onto that single word. The road ahead stretched endlessly into the darkness, and for the first time, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A figure standing in the distance, faceless, waiting. We sat in silence, the air inside the car so thick it felt like we were choking on it. None of us said a word, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. The figure was still there, standing motionless in the rearview mirror, just at the edge of the taillight's glow. Every instinct in me screamed to drive, to get as far away from it as possible, but my hands were frozen on the wheel. And then the GPS spoke. Proceed to your destination. The voice was robotic, calm, and utterly detached from the terror that had taken root in my chest. I hesitated, my fingers trembling as they gripped the wheel. "Don't listen to it," one of my friends whispered. "It's leading us back to whatever that was. What else do we do?" I snapped. "We're in the middle of nowhere." Before anyone could answer, the figure in the rearview mirror took a step forward. Just one step, but it was enough to jolt me into action. I slammed the car into drive and floored the gas pedal. The engine roared, and the car lurched forward, tearing down the highway at breakneck speed. The figure didn't follow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't need to, that somehow, no matter how far we drove, it would always be right behind us. The miles blurred together as we sped down the desolate road. No signs, no turns, just an endless stretch of asphalt cutting through the darkness. The GPS kept repeating the same phrase, its monotone voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Proceed to your destination." Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time didn't feel real anymore. Every so often, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure again. But the road behind us was empty. "We're not getting anywhere," someone said. Their voice was shaky, on the verge of panic. "We've been driving for hours, and nothing's changed." They were right. The fuel gauge hadn't budged. The clock on the dashboard was frozen at 3:17 a.m. It was like we were trapped in some kind of loop, endlessly circling the same stretch of highway. And then the radio came back on. First, it was just static. But slowly, a voice emerged from the noise. A low, gravelly whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't escape," it said. "Not without giving it what it wants." "What does that mean?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What does it want?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, the GPS screen flickered, the map disappearing and being replaced with a single word. "Choose." "What the hell does that mean?" Someone screamed from the back seat. Before I could respond, the headlights flickered, and the road ahead began to change. Shapes emerged from the darkness, their edges sharp and unnatural. They formed structures, buildings, trees, landmarks, but they were wrong, distorted, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. And then I saw it, an intersection up ahead. Two roads diverged, stretching into the void. One was bathed in light, warm and inviting, with the faint silhouette of a small town visible in the distance. The other was shrouded in shadows, a jagged, twisting path that seemed to plunge straight into the abyss. The GPS spoke again. "Choose." I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop at the edge of the intersection. The two paths loomed before us, each one more unsettling than the last. "What do we do?" someone asked, their voice trembling. "We take the lighted road," another insisted. "It has to be the way out." "But what if it's a trap?" I countered. "What if that's what it wants us to think?" The shadows on the dark road seemed to shift, writhing like living things. And in the distance, I thought I saw movement. A figure, or perhaps several, waiting in the blackness. I closed my eyes, my mind racing. The voice on the radio, the figures, the void. It all felt like some twisted game, one designed to break us. "We have to choose," I said finally. "We don't have a choice." The car idled at the crossroads, the engine humming like a heartbeat. My hand hovered over the gearshift, my pulse racing. And then, without a word, I made my decision. I turned the wheel sharply, aiming the car tower. The wheel turned toward the shadowed road, the one that plunged into the abyss. My gut screamed to stop, to reverse, to take the lighted path instead. But something about that glowing road felt too perfect, too unnatural. I pressed the gas. The car crept forward, its headlights barely penetrating the thick, writhing darkness ahead. "What are you doing?" someone shouted from the back seat. "It's a trap," I said, my voice shaking. "The lighted road. It's too easy." "Nothing about this is supposed to be easy," the others protested, but their voices grew faint as the shadows swallowed us. The road twisted and narrowed, the air growing colder with every passing second. The GPS screen flickered and died, leaving us with nothing but the headlights to guide us. And then they began to fail. One by one, the headlights dimmed, flickering like a candle in the wind until we were left in complete darkness. The car slowed on its own, no matter how hard I pressed the gas, until it finally rolled to a stop. I turned the key in the ignition, but it wouldn't start. The dashboard lights blinked and faded, leaving us stranded in the silent void. "Now what?" someone whispered, their voice trembling. Before I could answer, a soft noise broke the stillness. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like something lightly rapping against the car's roof. It was almost gentle, like the ticking of a clock. Tap, tap, tap. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Don't move," I whispered. "Don't make a sound." The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It moved from the roof to the windows, circling the car like a predator sizing up its prey. The air inside grew heavy, suffocating, and the smell of burnt metal and decay seeped in, making my stomach churn. And then we saw it. A face, or something that resembled one, pressed against the passenger side window. It was pale and featureless, with hollow indents where the eyes and mouth should have been. The skin looked wrong, like stretched leather, and the longer I stared, the more it seemed to shift, the features twisting into something almost human but not quite. The thing tilted its head as if studying us, and then it smiled. Not with a mouth, there wasn't one, but with a crack that split the blank surface of its face, jagged and impossibly wide. Someone screamed, breaking the fragile silence. The thing slammed its hand against the glass, and the car shook violently. More shapes emerged from the shadows, surrounding us. They weren't human. Their forms shifted and stretched, limbs too long, joints bending in ways that defied logic. They pressed against the car, their faces, or what passed for faces, peering in. "Turn the lights back on," someone screamed, but the headlights were dead. The engine wouldn't start. We were trapped. And then the radio crackled to life again. "You chose," the voice said, cold and final. "Now you must face it." The shapes outside began to claw at the car, their fingers leaving deep, black gouges in the metal. The roof buckled under their weight, and the windows began to crack, the glass splintering under the pressure. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But then, through the static, I heard something else. A faint, rhythmic hum, like a song just barely audible beneath the noise. It was coming from the road ahead. "Go!" I shouted, though I had no idea how. "We have to get to the end." The car lurched forward on its own, the engine roaring back to life as if something had willed it to move. The figures clawed at the vehicle, but they couldn't stop it. The darkness seemed to push back as we accelerated, the humming growing louder, guiding us towards something I couldn't yet see. The road ended abruptly, opening into a blinding light that swallowed everything. When I came to, we were parked on the side of the highway, back where it had all started. The car was still running, the gas gauge full. My friends were silent, staring blankly out the windows, their faces pale and drawn. "What just happened?" someone whispered. I didn't answer, couldn't. My hands were trembling as I gripped the wheel, staring at the road ahead. The GPS was back to normal, the destination reset to where we had been heading before everything went wrong. But in the rearview mirror, I saw it again. A figure, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching, waiting. We never spoke about that night again. We made it home, but things were never the same. Some of us moved away, others drifted apart. But I know one thing for certain, that road is still out there, and so is whatever waits at its end. Weeks passed, but the memory of that night clung to me like a second skin. I couldn't sleep without seeing their faces or lack thereof. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I started sleeping with the lights on, the radio unplugged, and my phone turned off, but it didn't help. The others were struggling too. We barely spoke to each other anymore, each of us drowning in our own silent torment. Whenever I tried reaching out, all I got were short, clipped responses, or worse, silence. Whatever had happened on that road had broken something inside us. And then the strange things began. The first time it happened, I was driving home from work. The sun was just setting, and the sky was a mix of purples and reds. I was stuck in traffic, absent-mindedly staring at the license plate of the car in front of me, when my radio flicked on. I hadn't touched it. Static crackled through the speakers, and for a moment, I thought it was just interference. But then I heard it, that voice. The same voice that had spoken to us on the highway. "You don't belong here." I slammed my hand on the power button, but the radio wouldn't turn off. The static grew louder, and I swore I could hear something else beneath it. A faint tapping sound, like fingers drumming against glass. The traffic light turned green, and I floored it, weaving through cars as I tried to get away from What? I didn't know. But the tapping followed me. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from inside the car. I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. The figure was there, sitting in the back seat. Its smooth, featureless face turned toward me. It tilted its head, and I swear I saw that jagged crack of a smile begin to form. I didn't remember pulling over. All I know is that when I opened my eyes, I was on the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. The radio was off, the car silent, but the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing down on me like a physical weight. The others experienced similar things. One of my friends called me in the middle of the night, his voice shaking as he described seeing the figures outside his apartment, standing motionless under the streetlights. Another swore he heard the hum, the same one from the shadowed road, whenever he tried to sleep. And then there was the missing time. I'd wake up in strange places, with no memory of how I got there. Parking lot, a gas station off the interstate. Once, I found myself standing in the middle of my own living room, the front door wide open and the cold night air pouring in. Each time, I felt like I'd been somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't remember, but that filled me with a sense of dread so profound it left me shaking. The worst came one night, about a month after the road trip. I was home alone, trying to distract myself with a movie, when the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and the silence was deafening. I fumbled for my phone, but it wouldn't turn on. And then the tapping started. It was faint at first, coming from the windows. Then it grew louder, circling the house, moving from one window to the next. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it outside, but there was nothing there. Just the empty yard and the swaying shadows of the trees. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice breaking. The tapping stopped. For a moment, the silence felt like a reprieve. But then I saw it. A shape, standing at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the flashlight's beam. It stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I ran out the back door, my bare feet slapping against the cold ground as I sprinted toward my car. I fumbled with the keys, tears streaming down my face, and finally managed to start the engine. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. It was sitting in the back seat again, its head tilted, its smile widening. I don't know how to stop it. I don't even know what it wants. All I know is that the road never really let us go. Still out there, waiting, calling us back. And sooner or later, I think it's going to get what it came for. I knew it was only a matter of time before the road demanded more. The signs were everywhere, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. The clock on my dashboard always seemed to read 3:17 a.m., no matter the time of day. My GPS would glitch and show nothing but the word home, the same way it had that night. And the figures, they were closer now. At first, I'd only catch glimpses of them. A shadow standing just out of reach of a streetlight, a reflection in a window that shouldn't have been there. But as the days wore on, they grew bolder. I'd find handprints on my car in the morning, long smears of that black, tar-like substance trailing down the windows. The others were suffering, too. One friend disappeared completely. His phone went straight to voicemail, and when I went to his apartment, the place was eerily empty. No furniture, no clothes, just the faint smell of burnt metal lingering in the air. The rest of us tried to stick together, but we were falling apart. One of them, the quietest of the group, called me one night, his voice ragged and broken. "I saw it again," he whispered. "The road. It's in my dreams, but it's not a dream. I wake up and I'm there." "Where?" I demanded. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. The line went dead. It was the second week of this madness when I found myself driving toward the highway again. I didn't remember deciding to go. I didn't even remember getting in the car. But there I was, the empty road stretching ahead of me. The clock on the dashboard frozen at 3:17 a.m. I should have turned around. I should have stopped the car, gotten out, anything. But my hands were locked on the wheel, my foot pressing down on the gas as if I had no control over my own body. The highway looked the same as it had that night. Endless, desolate, and suffocatingly dark. But this time there were no stars, no moonlight. Just blackness, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the edges of the road. The GPS flickered to life, its screen glowing faintly. The word "choose" appeared again, flashing rhythmically, like the beating of a heart. And then the radio crackled. "You're almost there," the voice said. It wasn't robotic this time. It was deeper, colder, almost human, but with an edge that sent shivers down my spine. "Why?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. But the voice responded. "To finish what you started." The road began to twist, curving sharply in ways that defied logic. It felt alive, shifting beneath the tires, leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. And then, in the distance, I saw it, the intersection. The same two roads we'd been forced to choose between that night. This time, there was no debate. The lighted road was gone. Only the shadowed path remained, its surface glistening like wet ink. I tried to stop the car, but the brakes wouldn't respond. The steering wheel turned on its own, guiding me down the dark path. The shapes were there again, lining the road, their faceless forms twitching and jerking as I passed. They didn't touch the car this time. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavy, suffocating. I couldn't look at them, Couldn't let myself acknowledge their existence, but I felt their eyes, or whatever they used to see, burning into me. The hum started again, low and rhythmic, vibrating through the car. It grew louder as I drove, filling my head until I thought it would split open. The road narrowed, the darkness pressing in from all sides. And then, I saw it. The end of the road. It wasn't a destination. It wasn't even a place. It was a void, a swirling mass of shadows and light, pulling everything into its center. The hum became a roar, deafening and relentless, and the figures began to move, closing in from all sides. The car stopped just short of the edge. The engine died, and the headlights flickered one last time before going out completely. I was alone in the dark. The voice returned, this time right in my ear. Step out. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. I didn't want to obey, but I didn't have a choice. The door creaked open, and I stepped onto the cold, slick surface of the road. The figures surrounded me, their forms shifting and merging, their faceless heads tilting as they watched. The void loomed ahead, pulsating with a sickly light that seemed to reach for me, pulling me closer. And then I understood. This was never about the road. It was about me, about all of us. The road wasn't taking us anywhere. It was taking from us, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. When I woke up, I was back in my driveway. The car was parked neatly, the keys in the ignition. My clothes were damp, and the faint smell of burnt metal lingered in the air. I haven't told anyone what happened that night. I don't think I could, even if I tried. The others are gone now, disappeared one by one, until I'm the only one left. The road hasn't called me back again. Not yet, but I know it's waiting. Life after the road became a game of waiting. The days passed in a haze of routine, but every shadow held a threat, and every quiet moment felt like the calm before a storm. I stopped sleeping altogether, too afraid of what I might see, or where I might wake up. The clock in my house was useless. No matter how often I replaced it, it always stopped at 3:17 a.m. The figures came less frequently, but their absence didn't bring peace. It felt deliberate, like they were giving me space to prepare for something worse. It wasn't until weeks later that I realized the road hadn't just taken my friends. It had taken time itself. I started noticing strange gaps in my memory. A dinner with my father that I couldn't recall scheduling. A coworker asking why I'd skipped a meeting I didn't even know was happening. And the date on my phone. It wasn't adding up. Somehow I'd lost days. But the worst discovery came one cold morning, when I opened my front door to find a package on the step. It was small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. My name was scrawled on the top in shaky, uneven handwriting. I should have ignored it. I should have burned it. But curiosity, and something deeper, more primal, compelled me to open it. Inside was a single object, a GPS unit, identical to the one I'd used on the trip. The screen lit up the moment I touched it, the glow casting eerie shadows across my face. And then the word appeared, home. I threw it away, or at least I tried to. The next morning, it was back on my nightstand, the screen still glowing softly. The thing wouldn't turn off, wouldn't break, no matter how hard I smashed it. It was a message, clear and undeniable. The road was calling again. I resisted for as long as I could. Weeks turned into months, and the world around me grew stranger. People I thought I knew no longer recognized me, their faces blank and unfamiliar, like masks I hadn't noticed before. My house didn't feel like mine anymore. Doors creaked open on their own, and the windows showed landscapes that didn't exist. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me. And always, the GPS waited, its screen glowing persistently, unyielding. Then came the night when I stopped running. It was just past midnight when the tapping started again. At first, it was faint, coming from the windows like before. But this time, it grew louder, faster, until it sounded like the walls themselves were alive, trembling under the force. The lights flickered, the air thickened, and the GPS chimed from its spot on the nightstand. The screen had changed. Last chance. I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I grabbed the GPS, got into my car, and let it guide me. The road was waiting for me, just as I remembered it. That suffocating darkness, the endless stretch of asphalt, and the clock frozen at 3:17 a.m. The GPS led me unerringly to the intersection. The same two paths, now both shrouded in shadows. But this time, there was no hesitation. The car moved forward, the road narrowing into a single lane that twisted into the void. The hum started again, low and menacing, growing louder with each passing second. The figures were there, lining the road, their faceless heads turning as I passed. They didn't stop me. They didn't need to. At the end of the road, the void was waiting. It was larger now, more alive, its swirling mass of shadows and light pulsating with a hunger that felt infinite. I stopped the car and stepped out, the ground beneath me slick and cold. The figures closed in, their forms blending with the darkness. And then the voice returned, not from the GPS, but from everywhere, all around me. "You were warned." I fell to my knees, the weight of the voice pressing me down. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice raw. "Why me?" The void pulsated, and for the first time, I felt its answer. Not in words, but in a surge of emotion so overwhelming it nearly consumed me. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was hunger. The road didn't want me. It wanted my fear, my desperation, my pain. It fed on them, grew stronger with every moment of my suffering. And then I understood the final truth. The road isn't a place. It's a parasite, a predator that exists in the spaces between reality, feeding on those unlucky enough to stumble across it. It doesn't stop until it's drained everything from you. Your time, your memories, your soul. But it doesn't kill. No, that would be too easy. It leaves you alive, hollow, a warning to others. I woke up in my bed, the morning sun streaming through the windows. The GPS was gone, the clock ticking normally for the first time in months. But I wasn't relieved. I knew the truth now. The road wasn't finished with me. It never would be. And one day it will call me back again. Weeks turned into years, but the memory of the road never left me. It lingered like a shadow at the edges of my mind, seeping into every quiet moment. The smell of burnt metal haunted my dreams, and the tapping sound followed me wherever I went. But the road itself, its pull, was silent. For a while I thought I was free. I rebuilt my life, moved to a new city, changed my phone, and cut ties with anyone who knew what happened. I thought distance could save me. I thought time could bury it. I was wrong. The first sign came one cold autumn night. I was working late, the streets outside my office eerily empty. When I got into my car, I felt it immediately. A shift in the air, the faint hum of something wrong. The GPS lit up on its own. I hadn't used one in years, but there it was, glowing on the dashboard, even though I'd never installed one in this car. Home. I turned it off. I threw it onto the floor. But when I looked up, the road ahead had changed. The familiar streets of my city were gone, replaced by that endless stretch of highway, the one I swore I'd never see again. The clock on the dashboard read 3:17 a.m., and the figures were there, standing in the distance, waiting. This time, I didn't panic. The road had taken so much from me. My friends, my sanity, my life as I knew it. But it hadn't taken everything. Not yet. I gripped the wheel and pressed the gas, speeding toward the figures. They didn't move, didn't flinch, even as the car hurtled toward them. But just as I was about to hit them, they vanished, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. The road stretched on, twisting and narrowing, the hum growing louder. But this time, I didn't stop. I wouldn't let it break me. Hours, maybe days, passed as I drove. Time meant nothing here, the void swallowing every second, every mile. The figures appeared and disappeared, sometimes standing in the middle of the road, sometimes watching from the shadows. But they didn't scare me anymore. And then the road began to change. The asphalt cracked and warped, turning to something soft and pliable, like flesh. The headlights flickered, illuminating strange shapes in the distance. Structures that looked like buildings but weren't, their edges shifting and melting as I approached. The hum became a roar, the air vibrating with its intensity. And then, in the distance, I saw it, the void. It was larger now, its edges stretching into infinity. The figures lined the path to its center, their faceless heads tilted as they watched. This time, I didn't stop. I drove straight into the void. The car was swallowed by the darkness, the roar deafening, the air crushing. And then, everything went silent. When I woke up, I wasn't in my car. I wasn't on the road. I was standing in the middle of my childhood bedroom. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. The faded wallpaper, the old wooden desk, the posters on the walls. But something was wrong. The room was too quiet, too still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I turned toward the window, and my heart froze. The road was there, stretching into the horizon, the figures waiting at its edges. And then I saw myself. I was standing on the road, behind the wheel of my car, staring back at the house. The version of me on the road looked different, older, worn, hollow. Our eyes met, and I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. The other me smiled. I woke up again, this time in my apartment, drenched in sweat. The GPS was gone. The clock read 6 a.m. The world seemed normal, but I know better now. The road isn't just a place. It's a cycle, a loop that keeps pulling you back. No matter how far you run, you can't escape it. You can only delay it. And one day the road will come for you too. I don't know how long I've been fighting this thing. This road, this cycle that never ends. Time feels irrelevant now, like a cruel joke meant to keep me disoriented. The days blur together, each one darker than the last. But last night I felt it. The pull was stronger than ever. I woke up in my car, the engine idling, the clock frozen at 3:17 a.m. again. I wasn't parked outside my apartment or even on a street I recognized. The road stretched ahead, familiar and infinite, the void waiting at its end. This time, there was no hesitation. I gripped the wheel, and the car moved forward as if it had been waiting for my surrender. The hum started immediately, low and rhythmic, resonating through my chest. The figures appeared on either side of the road, more numerous than before, their faceless heads turning in unison to follow my progress. I knew I wouldn't be coming back from this trip. The void loomed closer with every mile, its edges pulsating with a sickly light that seemed to breathe. The figures stepped onto the road now, their jerky movements becoming more coordinated, more deliberate. They didn't just watch. They reached for the car, their long, spindly fingers scraping against the windows, leaving streaks of that black, tar-like substance. I didn't stop. The hum grew louder, deafening, as the void consumed the horizon. The road beneath me cracked and warped, turning into something unrecognizable. It wasn't asphalt anymore. It was alive, pulsing and writhing like the flesh of some ancient, unknowable creature. And then the car stopped on its own. The void was in front of me now, a swirling mass of shadows and light that seemed to pull the air from my lungs. The hum became a roar, and I felt it deep inside me, tearing at the edges of my sanity. The radio crackled to life, and the voice returned. Step out. This time I didn't argue. The air was freezing, heavy with the smell of decay and burnt metal. The figures surrounded me, their forms twisting and merging with the darkness. The void was closer now, its light seeping into the ground, into my skin. And then I saw it, my reflection in the void. It wasn't me. Not exactly. It was a version of me, distorted and wrong. Its face twisted into an unnatural smile. It spoke without moving its lips, its voice echoing inside my head. You've always belonged to us. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The void surged forward, and I felt myself being pulled into it, my feet leaving the ground as the shadows wrapped around me. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. And then I saw everything. The road isn't just a cycle. It's a web, stretching across realities, connecting places that were never meant to touch. It feeds on fear, on pain, on the souls of those who wander too far from the safety of the familiar. I saw its victims, countless faces, trapped in the void, their mouths open in silent screams. Some of them were familiar, my friends, my family, even strangers I'd passed on the street. They were all here, lost in the road's endless hunger. And then I saw myself, not the reflection in the void, but the real me, the version that had existed before all of this began. I was still in the car, my hands gripping the wheel, my face frozen in terror. The road stretched out ahead of me, the clock on the dashboard stuck at 3:17 a.m. The loop was starting again. The void spat me out onto the roadside, leaving me gasping and trembling on the cold asphalt. The car was gone. The figures were gone. But the road remained, stretching into the distance, its surface smooth and empty. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the horizon. Eventually, I got up and started walking. I've been walking ever since. If you ever find yourself on a road that doesn't feel quite right, turn around. Don't follow it, no matter how tempting it seems, because once you step onto that road, it will never let you go.